Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say. At the end of a week where Nicolas Sarkozy and Angela Merkel have tried to refound Europe, José Manuel Barroso has even talked about embracing the idea of shared sovereignty. But with Britain stepping out of this latest deal, some of you are asking whether the European Union is really worthy of the name. We're going to have all the latest developments over the next hour. We'll also be joined by a group of young Europeans to talk about what they want for the continent over the next few decades. And wherever you're watching us on BBC World News, we're live and you're welcome to take part. Well, if you're tweeting as you watch us, we're using the WHYS hashtag. You can also email, Facebook, call, text or Google Plus us during the hour. Now, this short story is shifting at a rate of knots, so let's check in with exactly where we are. The European Union countries have agreed in principle to a deal they hope will restore confidence in the Eurozone. It will see greater EU control over national budgets and automatic penalties for those whose deficits grow too large. But the deal will not take the form of a full treaty, and that's because the British Prime Minister, David Cameron, refused to sign up.
We're not going to be involved in this quite complex treaty with quite tough punishments for countries in other parts of Europe that live beyond their means, a whole lot of additional complexity, bureaucracy and rules and all the rest of it. We're not in that. Well, we're not in the euro, so we don't need to be in that. What we've done is squarely in Britain's national interest.
Police in Calcutta have arrested 6 people, including the 2 owners of a privately run hospital where a huge fire has killed nearly 90 people. Most of those who died were patients trapped on upper floors by smoke and flames. The hospital has denied that it ignored basic fire safety laws. In a ceremony in Indonesia, the Dutch government has apologised for a massacre committed by its soldiers over 60 years ago during Indonesia's struggle for independence. In the village of Rawajide in 1947, as many as 430 men and boys were rounded up and killed. And the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon has confirmed that the UN's political office for Somalia will move from Kenya to Mogadishu in January. Mr. Ban made a brief visit to Somalia amid tight security. He called on the Islamist group Al-Shabaab to stop its violence and join a peace process. Well, we have students from all over Europe with a keen interest in politics ready to talk to you about what's been happening during this extraordinary EU summit in Brussels. But before we introduce you to them, the BBC has been speaking to the British Prime Minister David Cameron. Our political editor Nick Robinson met with him today to discuss the measures that he's taken. He's used Britain's veto as a member of the European Union to not allow a full treaty reform to be introduced. What has been agreed at this summit is actually an intergovernmental agreement. It's not a full treaty. Let's see what the Prime Minister said to Nick Robinson.
Well, the choice was a treaty without proper safeguards or no treaty, and the right answer was no treaty. Of course, we're still in the single market. That is the best safeguard of keeping markets open. And had we opted for a treaty that would have had extra bureaucracy, extra legal complexity, a whole lot of new rules, mostly for other European countries, that actually, without proper safeguards, wouldn't have been in Britain's interest. And so I did the right thing.
You say it wouldn't have been Britain's interest. In what way? What is the bad thing that would have happened if you'd said, we go on? The city would have been no worse off than it is today. You wouldn't have been involved in these new rules on the euro because we're not in the euro. So what would have happened? Well,
the danger you have with a new treaty, which is adding to the European Union treaties, is that you're going to start distorting the single market, the European Union you're already a member of. And so you should only take the risk of a treaty within a treaty if you're going to get the safeguards you need. That was the judgment I had to make. I said before coming to Brussels that was exactly what I was aiming for, to get those safeguards, and if I couldn't get them I wouldn't sign a treaty, and I absolutely did what I said I was going to do.
When Europe's leaders meet, it's quite possible that 26 will be in the room. 1, you, Britain, will not be there. How on earth is that in the country's interest?
Well, when the Eurozone leaders meet, it's countries that are in the euro. We're not in the euro. we don't want to join the euro, so I don't need to go to meetings of eurozone leaders. It's their currency.
There is there's 17 leaders and 27. This is one.
Yeah, but
one country, one leader.
But the key thing is,
there.
what's in Britain's interest? When we're talking about defence, we're in NATO, the leading European player in NATO, driving the decision-making and the action as in Libya. When it comes to the single market, we're one of 27 with many of the best ideas for making that market generate growth and jobs, and we're listened to. But when it comes to the euro, no, we're not there. When it comes to the Schengen, no borders in Europe plan, I don't want to be there. I want us to have borders to protect against illegal immigration, drugs and guns. I think it's right for Britain to say, well, which bits of Europe most benefit us as a nation, and to focus on those things. And I'm not frightened of the fact that sometimes you might not be included in something. Are we better off outside the euro? You bet we are.
There's David Cameron. If you want to give your response to what he's had to say, we've also heard from Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy, among others, as well in Brussels. You can call us up now. Country code 44 2070 83 72 72. We'll call you back, so you won't pay for the call when you're on air. Now, let me introduce you to three people starting our conversation. Lorenz is a student in Mannheim in southern Germany. Welcome to you. We also have Hugh, a student in Paris, and here in London is Tim, a fellow at Oxford University. All of you, you're very welcome. Let's hear you first of all discussing what David Cameron had to say. Tim, why don't you lead us off?
I'm absolutely thrilled. I never thought I would say this, and it almost hurts me to say it, but I'm actually pleased that David Cameron is my Prime Minister. What he did today was he stood up for two things. First of all, for proper, sensible economics. He said we're not going to be part of attempts to regulate the city out of existence. And secondly, he stood up for the democratic principle that it's wrong for us to join a treaty whereby other countries would veto and vet our budgets. That's a gross, gross distortion of democracy, and the Prime Minister was absolutely right to do what he did.
Lorenz, let's bring you in.
Yeah, well, on the other hand, one could say there's no big surprise that he didn't join the agreement, because imagining where he's coming from a pretty Eurosceptical country and an even more Eurosceptical party, I think it was the right step for him to do for domestic sources. But for us from the continent, I guess it is sad that they're not in, but I don't overestimate that situation, and I think that at one point they will be back to the group of Europeans. I also.
Hugh in Paris, join us here.
So, well, I agree with Lorraine. I would say that this is certainly not a surprise, but it is bad news. Why is it? Because it adds complexity to the issue. We used to know the Europe with 17 countries, which was the Eurozone. Then we knew the Europe as with 27 countries without the European Union. And now we're facing a Europe with 26 countries. So what does it mean? It means more complexity, new treaties. This is certainly a bad news for Europe.
Well, I think, if I can step in here, there you hear the language, the terrifying language of European bureaucratic tyranny, the idea that democracy should be surrendered because otherwise the situation becomes too complex to manage. No, the fact is the Eurozone is not working. Europe has made some bad decisions. It's making another new bad decision in order to mop up some of those bad decisions. And Britain is saying at this stage, we'd like to back off a bit. That's our right. It doesn't matter if it makes things more complex. That's our right as a sovereign nation.
Yes,
wow.
But on the other hand, the aim is to increase the transparency and also to reduce complexity by making it more simply and more common and unified as a system. So I definitely see the goods of it.
Well, I certainly don't see the good of it. To say that a central European body should be able to tell a foreign government precisely how much it should spend on social programs, that's revolting. To see what happened in Greece and Italy, where basically democratic leaders, both of them to a certain degree inept or corrupt, were forced out of power by the European Union effectively, that's just disgusting. This is no longer simply an experiment in a single market. This is an undemocratic enterprise of Soviet proportions. And Britain has quite rightly said, we don't want to be part of this new treaty.
Hugh, I want to hear you respond to that point. Do you think democracy is being undermined in Brussels at the moment?
Oh, I respectfully disagree. And I think we've seen in the past month and in the past years that Great Britain relies as much as we do on a stable Eurozone, and that's what Angela Merkel says. So even though you may think, well, a full empowered Eurozone could be harmful in the short term for the UK, that's all right. But you have to think in the long term. You have to think of what's going to happen to you in 20 years, 10 years. Do you think that falling Eurozone will help the UK?
Oh.
Not at all, because...
No, absolutely not. But the Eurozone isn't working. I mean, it's a bizarre argument to say that Britain needs to be ever further integrated in order to make the euro work because it's great for us, when the euro is simply not working at the moment. Why would we go even further into something, become even more tied to something which is not working?
Well, I suppose the question that lots of our viewers are asking is whether this current agreement coming out of Brussels will go a long way to fixing the problems with the Eurozone. It's been acknowledged by Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy there were problems when it was set up. They would now argue those problems have been addressed. We have Laurent in Mannheim, Hugh's with us from Paris, Tim's in London. Wherever you're watching the BBC, you can get involved. Do tweet us using the WHYS hashtag. I can also see the hashtag Eurocrisis is trending in Caracas, Brussels and Sydney. I guess we would expect it to be trending in Brussels. Kevin has got in touch from London. The elephant in the room is the fact that some member states are bankrupt or nearly bankrupt, and fiscal union won't solve this. And lots of you are raising the issue saying, even if this works in the long term, what about the short term? And we'll get into that, I promise you, on World Have Your Say. Other calls coming in from Sweden, from Nigeria, Gambia and Tanzania. We'll get as many of you on the air as we can. And just breaking away from Europe for a moment, the Reuters newswire is quoting the election commission in the Democratic Republic of Congo as saying that the incumbent president, Joseph Kabila, has won the presidential election there. There have been delays with that result coming out. Reuters saying the DRC election commission saying that Joseph Kabila, the incumbent president, has won that vote and will continue for another term. Now let's pull up an email from Haumann in Cologne in Germany. He writes, Mr. Cameron, get out of the European Union. The Union doesn't need you. You are not any better than Greece because you only want the benefits of the Union and you give nothing in return. Adieu, he says. Tim, would you like it to be adieu? Would you like to be all the way out?
Yeah, adieu, goodbye, farewell, never see you again. I mean, that's my position. I don't expect the vast majority of British people to hold that position. But yes, that's what a single market is for. It is for economic benefits. It is not to create some dream socialist utopia in 30 or 40 years' time if we only go a little bit further in. I find the premise of that chap's remarks absolutely absurd.
And I'd like to quickly go back to Hugh in Paris. Hugh, bearing in mind your frustrations with Britain, would you prefer it now if it left the European Union completely?
Well, not at all. And again, I strongly disagree. I think the United Kingdom is a very powerful ally. We need them in the Eurozone, just as we need every Eurozone member. So I disagree. And I think I'm not surprised by the reaction of the UK. But again, your view is too narrow. You need to think broadly. So maybe you need to think in terms of markets, of exports, imports.
And I'm sure Tim will want to respond to that. Tim, hold your fire for a moment because we've got another couple of guests coming in. I can see that the former Italian Prime Minister Romano Prodi has been speaking to the BBC's NewsHour radio programme saying Europe will become more and more two-speed or many speeds or a mosaic of different clubs. Lots of different ways of putting it. He carries on, anytime you're out of the clubs, you compromise the new Europe and you will also lose power. Some people calling it a club within a club, a deal within a deal. Either way, you've got the vast majority of European Union countries signing up for a deal. Britain saying it doesn't want to be involved. Well, I was mentioning former Prime Minister Romano Prodi. Let's bring in Lorenzo. He's live with us over the internet. Actually, we can't go to him right now, but we can go to Sini, who's a politics student in Helsinki. Sini, thank you very much for being with us. What's your reaction to the deal?
Well, to the deal, and from a Finnish perspective, Finland obviously agreed to most of the parts. We have just one part that we're not agreeing to. But I like the idea that there's more strict rules to come, and I think it is a good start. I don't think it is the final solution, but I think it's a good start.
So if it's a good start, what else do you want? What more would you like to be added?
Well, the thing is that you can't really know what will happen right now. The euro crisis, there are different solutions and what can happen, and I don't think I can well, anyone can actually say what will happen, so what will be a good solution. I'd rather start with what we have right now. And you've been talking a lot about Great Britain stepping out, and I don't think that's a horrible thing. I understand your point of view. And from a Finnish perspective, well, I really understand if there's a lot of EU skepticism going on in Finland too. But in my opinion, I think it's a good start, and I don't know how to continue it though.
And it's interesting, your Prime Minister has been consistent all week saying if it's a treaty with all 27, if it's an intergovernmental deal with less than the 27, I don't mind, I just want the tighter rules. President Sarkozy has said the financial regulations they're introducing are crucial. I'm going to come back to Tim in a little while because I want to know why he doesn't believe the best way of bringing regulation into the financial sector is through the current deal. We'll talk to him about that in a couple of minutes' time. We're still here on World Have Your Say. Hi there, I'm Ros Atkins. We're live if you'd like to take part. Let's cross to the World Have Your Say newsroom because the BBC's Jill McGivering is with the team helping to take your calls. Hi, Jill. What are you hearing?
Hi. Well, the calls are coming in thick and fast. There's someone on the line over there from Nigeria, another call coming in from Sri Lanka, and a lot of calls as well outside the EU as well as in it, mostly focusing on some of the issues you've been discussing so far in the programme. That's particularly that decision by the UK to veto the agreement last night. And judging by what I've been hearing, I'd say opinion seems very strong, but also pretty much evenly divided. If anything, I'd say most of the UK callers are sounding the most Eurosceptic, with some of them using the line, look, we think the euro and the Eurozone is pretty much broken. We're not sure we should be part of it. One lady actually saying the sooner we're out of it, the better. But not everyone agrees with that. As I say, overall, fairly mixed. Abraham in Sweden, for example, got in touch just a few minutes ago. He was saying that he thinks the two most powerful European leaders are finally pulling it together, and he's saying, look, the rest of the EU needs to follow suit. Mohammed in Tanzania, a similar thought. He's saying, look, the UK decided not to sign this treaty, fair enough, but if so, what do they think the solution really is? What would they do about it? If you want to join the conversation, get in touch. You can post on Facebook, call in, and of course, if you're following us on Twitter, the hashtag is WHYS.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Jill. We'll speak to you later in the programme. That number again to call is country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Stanley in Toronto tweets a warning for Tim. He says the UK may lose control of what the European Union does. A loss of economic control would be a mistake. I can see Ian in Calcutta tweeting us saying, I see David Cameron has taken his ball and gone home. Do that too often, my boy, and no one will want to play with you anymore. We'll give Tim a chance to respond to that in a little while. And if you're tweeting us, don't forget, always use the WHYS hashtag. Hi there, I'm Ros Atkins. Thank you very much indeed for joining me here on World Have Your Say on BBC World News. We're live and continuing the BBC's coverage of this extraordinary EU summit in Brussels. We thought we might get a treaty, then David Cameron used Britain's veto. So no treaty, because a treaty must involve Britain signing up to it. So we've now got an intergovernmental deal with what looks like 23 countries signing up, 3 saying they'll put the idea to Parliament, and 1 saying it doesn't want to be involved at all. Now, still with us, we have Hugh in Paris, Tim in London, and Sini with us from Helsinki. And just before the break, we were talking a little bit about regulation, and we were talking about the Finnish enthusiasm for tightening up the rules, checking how countries behave and how companies behave. Tim, on the face of it, that looks like a very sensible idea.
It certainly sounds sensible. Since 2008 or 2009, the EU has been pushing for more regulation of the financial sector. Things like taxes on transactions, saying what they can and can't trade in and how, etc., etc. That's a fantastic idea, but it's 50 or 60 years out of date. The nature of finance capital now is that if you make something difficult to do in Europe, it will move to another part of the world. We live in a globalized world with a globalized financial sector, and all that will happen if Britain agrees to those regulations is that the city will suffer. The city is the engine of recovery in Britain, and so the recovery in Britain will suffer, and that'll hurt all of Europe. This is a pig-headed idea that simply won't work.
Sydney, let's bring you in.
Okay, so you're saying the whole idea won't work, but well, I can't really say from Britain's point of view, but from a Finnish point of view, like our Prime Minister said, we are very in for all the more rules and more of strictness. And I believe that that is the right way to go right now. If we started to go in a different direction, small countries like Finland and Denmark and other of us who actually have a really good financial situation, we would suffer from the different decisions made in the whole. And if we have rules, that means bigger countries can't have more of an influence on us. And also more rules mean more stability. If we just we stick to what we got, and then we follow the different regulations, and it will end up in a situation that is going in the right direction, in my opinion, of course.
And President Sarkozy certainly has sympathy with your argument. He said in his press conference an hour or two ago, David Cameron asked for something that we all thought was unacceptable, a protocol in the treaty that would allow the UK to be exempt from a certain number of regulations on financial services. And this next bit is the crucial part of the quote. He carries on, "We weren't able to accept that because we consider, on the contrary, that a good part of the worries of the world comes from the deregulation of financial services." All of you watching, you're very welcome to let us know which side of the argument you come down on. Calls coming in from France, Trinidad, Somalia and Germany. I was mentioning Hugh in Paris. If you're thinking his appearance has slightly changed, that's because he's taking a break for 5 minutes, and we're bringing in Lorenzo, who's live with us from Italy. He's an economics student. Lorenzo, what's your view of regulation? Do you think the Eurozone and the European Union is right to want more of it?
Oh, yeah, sure. I would not say from an Italian point of view, because that would mean being selfish and not European. But from a European point of view, regulations is exactly the perfect solution for what is going on right now. Take Greece, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Spain, even France and Germany. If we don't set up some common benchmark, if we don't make the member states respect them, as we haven't done yet, that would mean going deeper in the crisis and not solving anything. The regulations should be the benchmark for the future European Union, for a stronger European Union. And the fact that UK is not agreeing with this regulation, with these regulations, make the whole agreement that doesn't make an agreement at all. It's just something useless, I would say.
All right, thank you very much for that point of view. You're talking about the regulation of countries, and David Cameron said, look, we're not in the Eurozone. We don't need to worry about how Greece or Spain or Italy are regulated. But, Tim, there is another area of regulation. That's the financial sector. President Sarkozy argues that, go back to 2008, it's that sector which got us into a lot of this trouble, and yet David Cameron is still resisting any attempts to regulate what it does.
Well, absolutely. But, look, everyone who has spoken so far, including me, has talked in terms of what is in their interests, including the lady from Finland put it very well, that at present the people of Finland regard it as being in their interest to regulate the financial sector. Well, that's how Europe sees it. It's not how Britain sees it. See, we don't regard ourselves as Europeans. We regard ourselves as a sovereign nation state, and our foreign policy and our fiscal policy is about what's good for us. And in Britain, where we have very little industry, where we rely heavily upon the service sector and upon the financial sector, the only way we're going to get ourselves out of this current rut is to regrow the financial sector. And the very worst way to do that is to put burdens on it. This is not a moral point. This is not a point about what's good for Europe. It's not a point about what's good for humanity. That's the way Britain's going to dig itself out. But David Cameron understands it, and that's why he said no.
But Tim, that's a fascinating word to use. You say this is not about morality. Let's bring back in Hugh in Paris. Do you think that to some extent this is about morality, about countries and companies behaving in the right way?
Well, for once, I must say I agree with Tim. Of course it's about morality. Of course you need the countries and the companies to act the right way. But at the same time, what you need, and Tim, you said just the right word, it's growth. We don't need austerity. We need to think long-term again, and we need growth. When I look around me, when I look at in France, for example, there was a summit with the French students for the Web 2.0 in Paris. I see talented people, I see brilliant people, and I see people who need financing. If you prevent those people from getting the right financing, even though they're brilliant, they will never make it. So now we need to replenish the financial sectors in order to help those French talented people, but also I'm sure those British talented people, to get the right financing and restart this growth. And this should be a fresh start.
Well, no one can possibly disagree with that. We're just going to disagree over how you create that growth. For example, in the cases of countries like Greece or Italy, the very worst way to do that is to tie them to an overvalued currency so they can't devalue. So all they can do in a recession in order to balance their books is desperately cut. In that sense, I don't see how the new treaty, with its tight rules on how much governments can spend, I don't see how that is good for growth for Mediterranean countries.
Tim, that's the area I'd like to get into in the next half an hour of World Have Your Say. What this deal will do for the Eurozone, not in the long term, but in the short term. We'll get to that in a moment. I can see that the Serbian President Boris Tadic says his country will not give up after the EU has delayed a decision on its candidate status until February. He says we belong to Europe. Also, Croatia signed various paperwork, which means that it will certainly be joining the European Union and becoming the 28th member in a few months' time. I'm Ros Atkins, welcome to World Have Your Say, and today it's all about the day after the night before. The European Union summit in Brussels is entering its last hour or two, and in the words of the BBC's Europe editor Gavin Hewitt, it was the night that changed Europe. The question now is whether it's a change for the better. We'll continue to bring you all the latest developments, statements and press conferences from Brussels, and of course we'll mix that with your reaction from around the world. Wherever you live, wherever you're watching, you're very welcome to take part. Well, more and more of you get online as you're watching World Have Your Say. If you would like to join in on Facebook, Google+, or Twitter as you watch, all of the contacts will be on the screen through the show. We're using the WHYS hashtag all the time, so if you tweet using that, we'll pick up your messages. Right, let's establish exactly where we are with this story from Brussels. It's moving all of the time. This is the latest we have here on the BBC. The European Union countries, 27 of them, met, but only 26 agreed in principle to a deal they hope will restore confidence in the Eurozone. The deal won't take the form of a full treaty. That's because the British Prime Minister, David Cameron, would not sign up. And police in the Indian city of Calcutta have arrested 6 people, including the 2 owners of a privately run hospital where a huge fire has nearly killed 90 people. The hospital has denied that it ignored basic fire safety laws. In a ceremony in Indonesia, the Dutch government has apologized for a massacre committed by its soldiers over 60 years ago during Indonesia's struggle for independence. As many as 430 men and boys were rounded up and killed. And the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon has confirmed that the UN's political office for Somalia will move from Kenya to Mogadishu in January. Mr. Ban had been making a brief visit to Somalia. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. I can see calls coming in from Jamaica, Senegal, Qatar and Peru. A couple of other developments. US stocks have opened higher in the wake of the Eurozone's agreement on that new fiscal deal. More calls from Kuwait, the US, India and Dubai. If you're calling up, do persevere. If we don't pick up straight away, we'll do our very best to speak to you, as many of you as we possibly can. Let's also just take a brief recap on what that new deal will mean. As I was saying, 23 countries have signed up. 3 will put it to their parliament. Britain has said it's not taking part. There's going to be a commitment to balanced budget. The structural deficit of each country can no longer be further than 0.5% of the GDP. There will be sanctions for any country who exceeds those deficit limits, and this is perhaps the most striking element of the deal, national budgets will have to be submitted to the European Commission, which will have the power to request that they are revised. Let's discuss that last point with our guests who are joining us from different parts of the world. Tim's with us in London, Eva is also with us, and Lorenz is with us from Mannheim in Germany. Lorenz, do you have any concerns that your budget, your country's budget, will have to be looked over by the European Commission?
Well, yes, partially I do, because, I mean, there are some irresponsible things in any budget, in every country, I guess. So I think that there might be a point of revision, but I don't think that the European Commission will tell us what to change, but they will just point out irregularities and things that could weaken our economic performance and fiscal performance.
What about you, Eva? Bulgaria is not in the euro, it is in the European Union. It's going to put this to its parliament. Do you think that's the right thing to do?
So I think that the euro is not good for Bulgaria because my country is not very rich and there will be an inflation. So the salary, our salaries in the country are not like in Germany or France, and we have to live poor than before. And for example, now the minimum salary is around 2,000 euro. And can you imagine how one person can live with so much salary?
And Tim has been with us since the beginning of the programme. A few people responding to some of the things you've been saying, Tim. Henry's watching in Mumbai. He's tweeted saying, David Cameron put his backbench foot down in Brussels. And just to explain to those of you watching who don't follow every move of British politics, there is one theory that David Cameron was under extreme pressure from some MPs, Conservative MPs, to be more Eurosceptic than he may normally be, and that he's taken the invitation to do that. Tim, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that probably has played some role in the decision he's made. But to go back to the point that was just made about Bulgaria, it was a very, very good one. The question that Lenin always asked of every economic or power relationship is, who benefits? Let us say that Bulgaria decides to spend more than the limit that the EU wants to impose on its deficit. Let us say it wants to spend more than the European Union wants it to. Who benefits the European Union forcing it to revise its budget? Well, the EU does, not Bulgaria. This is a market. It's supposed to be an economic relationship, one which is supposed to benefit all its members individually and equally. What is happening there is the creation of a new power relationship that effectively undermines Bulgarian sovereignty and says that the EU understands what's best for the Bulgarian people, well, not Bulgaria's elected leaders.
Tim, what you're calling undermining sovereignty, José Manuel Barroso yesterday called sharing sovereignty. I guess it depends which way you want to view it. Eva, let me bring you in again and get the Bulgarian perspective. Do you think that these tighter rules which the European Union is seeking will benefit Bulgaria?
I'm not sure, but maybe not, because I think that Bulgaria hasn't been ever ready to be a member of the European Union, so we didn't have to participate this union. So I think that the rules will be not very good for my country.
All right, so you've got some doubts about them. Thank you very much for being with us, Eva. I can see messages coming in from Sudan, Bangladesh, Thailand, Romania and Greece. World Have You Say is always live when we're on BBC World News, so as you watch, if you want to take part, there's always an open invitation. Here's a report from Peter Cripps of the Press Association. He writes, the London market looked set to finish the week on a high amid plans for an EU treaty change to put a cap on the region's debt crisis. That seems to suggest, Hugh, that the right decisions have been taken.
Well, I think it's always the same thing. This crisis has been here for 2 years, and each time there's an announcement, and the markets relax positively. But then, if you look into the details, well, there are still a number of questions that are being unanswered. For example, the IMF is going to bring 200 million euros in the balance. Well, as fundings. Well, where will these 200 million euros come from? And then another question is the ESM, this new fund, will be 500 billion euros big. Well, why 500 billions? Why not more? These are all the questions that the markets will try to dig into, and you will see that even though the reaction in the short term is positive, mixed but positive, you will see that in the longer term, while people start digging, they will need some answers. And if those answers are not provided, you will see another fall in the markets.
Hugh, thank you very much.
Just like it happened before.
Thank you very much indeed. Just to reiterate to those of you watching, this has been one of the big issues of the week, whether the European Central Bank would change its role, would become a lender of last resort, would sweep up all of those bad debts in countries like Greece to help stabilise the Eurozone. That hasn't happened as yet. And Patrick in Ireland has emailed the BBC. He writes, does anyone not see anything wrong with Germany and France deciding what the rest of Europe has to do? Europe is getting less and less democratic. I'm Irish and I no longer care if the Euro survives. It was bad for my country and it still is. Well, Albert's joining us from Copenhagen. Hi, Albert. Thank you for joining us. Do you worry for democracy in Europe?
Well, no, not too much, as Denmark is not a part of the Eurozone yet. It is only a part of the ERM2 collaboration. But yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, Denmark is a sovereign state as we speak. It might change, but as we speak now, it is a sovereign state.
And Lorenz, let's bring you in from Mannheim in Germany, because after all, Germany has shaped this whole deal. Do you regret that your country has so much power now?
Well, I don't regret it, but I don't really think that it is my country that has to work. I really envy the initiative that our chancellor is putting forward, and but I also think that it's just Germany and France going on a single road there. Because after all, 20 countries signed because they think that the treaty increases somehow the credibility of us as a union, and so I don't see any initiative.
All right, well, you're playing it down, but it's undoubtedly true that when President Sarkozy and Chancellor Merkel met on Monday, it was widely accepted. It was Chancellor Merkel who got most of the things that she wanted. Tim, are you concerned about the increased influence of Germany?
Oh, of course I am. Of course I am. Look, throughout the recent crises in Italy and Greece, driving much of the negotiations, driving many of the discussions, was the question of how much the German taxpayer was prepared to bail out failing countries. And Germany decided that rather than continuously pumping money into the system and rescuing those countries, instead it would push for closer integration. It is calculated that that is a better deal for its taxpayers. And it's probably right. You know, the markets have bounced back this morning. This is going to be, in the short term, a good move for the Eurozone. But for those of us who care either about democracy or the economies of smaller countries that are going to get eaten up, this is not such a good deal. Also, our markets don't just lie within the Eurozone. You know, we've had phone calls today from Calcutta, we've had phone calls from Africa. It's in the developing nations with whom we should trade freely and fairly and without encumbrance from Europe. It's with those nations that our economic future lies.
Well, I'm sure we get lots of calls from West Africa concerned about the impact on the Eurozone crisis on their exports. But I wonder, Albert, in Copenhagen, do you worry about the power that Germany has now?
Well, I wouldn't worry too much about it, but, well, I'm, of course, a little worried that Germany being the superior power in the European Union. So, well, if Denmark were to join the euro, I would definitely be a little bit afraid. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Albert. You're in Denmark. El Techno has emailed from Sweden, writing, let's stay out of this mess whenever possible. The problem is that the EU is a grandiose scheme that assumes there's a one-size-fits-all plan for different countries, cultures, climates and locations. And AC has emailed us from France saying the UK's never been a proactive member of the Union, just the destructive I want member. And David has tweeted us from Colorado. By the way, if you are tweeting as you watch, do use the WHYS hashtag. David says the EU is still ironing out its faults. Once it starts productively functioning, the UK may be a more active part of it. Well, David, if you're still watching, I suppose some people might say it's had quite a long time to iron out its faults. It's now decades old. It's not a new creation. Has it taken too long to get it right, I wonder? Do tweet us back using the WHYS hashtag. Now, let's bring in Jill McGivering from the World Have Your Say team, where all of your calls are being taken. Hi, Jill. We were getting lots last time I spoke to you. What new themes are coming up?
Well, still an awful lot of comment coming in from right around the world. Tim was just saying a moment ago that this is something that's relevant for everybody. That's certainly being reflected in the range of calls we're getting. A lot from within the EU, a lot from the UK in particular, but also an awful lot from the Middle East, from Asia, from Africa, from North America and so on. Lots of them sounding very sceptical about this whole deal. Fairly typical one was Reginald from the UAE, who just said, why pour money into a sinking ship? But I'd say the main focus of conversation still is on this whole debate about whether or not the UK was right or not to use its veto. And from what we're hearing so far in these calls, opinion pretty much divided. Hubert in France heard Tim talking on that topic a little bit earlier and wanted to respond to that. He said David Cameron just wants all the benefits of being a club member without actually being in the club. But it's fair to say for every negative comment about it, we've had pretty much a positive one. For example, Alex in Saudi Arabia saying this treaty won't work either for the EU or for the UK. It's time for them to part ways.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Jill. I can see that Rob, writing on the Daily Telegraph's website, and your average Daily Telegraph listener would probably vote for David Cameron. He writes, bravo, Cameron. Some people can still remember the last time Britain stood alone in Europe. And I think Rob describes that very much as a good thing. We're going to take a break here on World Have Your Say, but we're going to be back in a couple of minutes. We're live, and wherever you're watching, you're still very welcome to take part. Hi, I'm Ross Atkins. Thanks for joining me on World Have Your Say. Of course, we're talking about the EU summit in Brussels. There is a new deal. 23 of the EU members have agreed. 3 will put it to their parliaments, and Britain does not want to have anything to do with it. The deal essentially says there'll be tighter rules on how countries manage their deficits, stricter punishments if they don't do that, and they'll have to offer up their budgets to the European Commission for approval before they then get shown to the national parliaments. We're discussing whether this maps a decent route out of the Eurozone crisis. By the way, I can just see the Daily Mail newspaper in the UK has a picture with the headline Le Snub. They often call the rugby match between England and France Le Crunch. Well, this is Le Snub. Apparently, it's when Nicolas Sarkozy dodged a handshake with David Cameron with a swift body swerve. I've no idea if it's true, but it's a very good headline. Now, let's pull up a message from Susie. She emailed the BBC to say, of course, this isn't the beginning of the breakup of the European Union. This is 26 countries moving forwards towards unity, strength, growth, wealth, and cooperation. Well, let's see if our guests agree with that. We have Hugh with us from Paris, Albert's in Copenhagen, and David is a Swedish student in London who joins us live. David, are you as positive as Susie is?
Yes and no, to quote Edmund Blackadder, to say, I think it is I think it was necessary, this treaty, and I think that David Cameron did I think this is a symptom that David Cameron just wanted to appeal to his own backbenchers, because the fact is, the treaty says tighter budget rules, and surely it should be applauded by Conservatives, but those of us that know our history knows that not even the great Mrs. Thatcher herself was good on the deficit and so on.
Well, it's funny you say that, actually. I saw one BBC economics correspondent saying this Euro deal is something that which Republicans in America can only dream of. And also, I approve of the first ever mention of Blackadder on World Have Your Say. I don't know if we'll get another one very soon. I just wonder, Albert, if you're feeling as positive as David is.
Well, it's hard to say. As Denmark not being a part of the Eurozone, well, yeah, I kind of am. Even though that's a kind of, well, not too optimistical point of view, I kind of am.
All right, so you're kind of somewhere in the middle. What about you, Hugh, in Paris? How do you feel this week has been for France?
Well, again, you know, France is under pressure. Remember that this morning, 3 banks were downgraded, 3 French banks. This is quite huge. But what's happened is that the markets, the French market, the CAC 40 this morning, was still on the increase. It was a bullish market this morning. Why? Because, well, overall, even within those bad news, we'll still have confidence in the Eurozone and we'll still believe in it. So my answer would be overall positive, although I'm very, well, afraid for the short-term future.
Hugh, David and Albert, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in Tim in London. We've only got 30 seconds, Tim. I saw one commentator say, if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu. Are you not worried that might be the case for the UK?
Absolutely not. A few minutes ago, someone texted in to say that David Cameron had picked up his ball and walked away. Well, if that's true and the EU really is a game, think about it this way. It's run on far too long. Several people have got injured. It's too expensive. The rules are fixed. And despite all of that, no one's winning. We're better off out of this game.
Whether you drop out of it or not, I think it's certain that it's going to carry on, and we'll keep bringing you all the developments on this particular game in Brussels here on BBC World News. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Do carry on the conversation at facebook.com/World Have Your Say. And if you can listen to World Have Your Say on the radio at 18 GMT, it's live from Kabul today. Goodbye.